Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining, first and foremost. My name is Sevda, and I'm a student. I actually recently moved to Austin. It's been just a couple of months, not even like 6 months. And before that, I was in Chicago, and in Chicago is actually where I met with, like, I was introduced to the concept of dialogue. And in Chicago, it was through Niagara Foundation's friendships dinner that I was lucky to meet wonderful members of the dialogue. And when I moved to Austin with my family, there was another friendship and dialogue dinner hosted by the Dialogue Institute of Austin. And I attended there, where I met a lot of people here, like from different backgrounds. So I consider that a privilege. And tonight, it is my pleasure to open this conversation, open this talk, and be your host. Um, I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Institute, on behalf of the Dialogue Institute. And in these difficult times of the pandemic, the need for dialogue and friendship is more evident and more obvious. And therefore, it is our goal to help bring everyone together as much as possible to continue promoting compassion and collaboration, partnership, and community service through dialogue and conversations. And towards this goal, we organize intellectual, social, cultural events such as the Dialogue Matter and the French Pen Dialogue Dinner, which are informal, discussions with a prominent speaker about a topic, maybe sometimes various topics. And today, normally we would do that in person, but today we're doing it like we're continuing our tradition and finding more virtual excuses to bring everyone together through social platforms such as a Zoom call and YouTube, like we're doing right now. And tonight, we're having two very special guests, two very special speakers from the Institute, Betül Sayın and Mualla Özgüven. They're both volunteers. They're both volunteer members of the Dialogue Institute of Austin and have been part of these interfaith activities for a while now. And they're going to share with us an abundant resource of 4 prominent women of faith who were addressed in a saying or multiple sayings of the prophet. And now I leave the floor to our speakers.
Thank you, Sevda, for this nice introduction. I'm Betül, and good afternoon, everybody. And I hope everybody is doing well and making their time at home as meaningful and better as possible with their families. And I believe our Muslim sisters and brothers are having a great Ramadan so far. Ramadan Mubarak to you all. I know for most of us, the time spent at home is as busy as a time when we were out for working or doing other activities, and we are all occupied somehow. And while there is a lot going on in our houses, we also seek times to spend together and to share. So I thank you all in advance for providing time to meet with us today. My friend Mualla and I thought it will be great to remember some remarkable women of faith and look into their life stories to have a deeper understanding of their characters and to look into their life stories and to have a deeper understanding for what they set for us. And these women we would like to bring forth are mentioned in a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he praised them by expressing that they are the most prominent women. So we wondered why among all the other women, beginning with Eve up until his period, he chose them. And we will not directly answer this question, but we found some noteworthy information from their lives. Quran mentions the names of 25 male prophets, messengers. Quran also mentions 24 women without calling their names, but as references. And some of these women are believers, while some are not. Let's highlight 4 of these most prominent female characters in the Holy Quran. and in the sayings of prophet and delve deeper into their characters and the roles they played. Let's begin with the saying of prophet, and let's see what he said. And so these women that he mentioned are the ones who belong to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions each. And according to what we learn from various hadith, the sayings of the prophet, there are four most virtuous women. And they are Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh, Mary, Maryam, the mother of Jesus, the wife of Khadija, the wife of Prophet, and Fatima, the daughter of Prophet. And the story behind is when one day Prophet was with his companions, and let's follow it in the slides too, the messenger of God drew 4 lines on the ground. Then he said, "Do you know what this is?" And the companions said, "The messenger knows best." And then he said, "The best of the women of paradise are Khadija bin Huwaylid, Fatima bin Muhammad, Asiya bin Muzahim, the wife of Pharaoh, and Maryam bint Imran. May God be pleased with them all." So as Sebda also said, the same saying is uttered in many other occasions as well. If we list the most virtuous women in the sayings of Prophet in the chronological order, it is going to be Asiya first, then Mary, then Khadija, and then Fatima. And we decided to utter their stories and their importance for us in this order. So I'm going to begin with Asiya, and later Mualla are going to take turns to share the stories of each remarkable woman. Let's begin with Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh. Asiya was mentioned in the most ancient and classical sources of the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. In the Quran and in the Islamic tradition, Asiya was the wife of Pharaoh. And in the biblical resources in the book of Exodus, Asiya is the daughter of Pharaoh. And despite the variations of her story among the Jews, Christians, and the Muslims, she is the adoptive mother of Prophet Moses. And her name is not known as Asiya in the biblical resources, but it varies. They call her as Bethia or Tharmothis or Tharmuth. And also in Christianity, she is known as Maris or Marho. And if you would like to share more information about her from your tradition, you can please share it in the comments. I'm going to talk about her as the wife of Pharaoh according to Muslim tradition, and Asiya's story begins in Egypt, where she lived with her husband, Pharaoh, who is known as the greatest tyrant of all time. Asiya grew up as a queen in the palaces of Pharaoh, enjoying the life of kings. She saw the brutality of power, the tyranny of the absolute ruler, and the obedience of his followers. However, she quickly became bored of this life, of this misguidance, and sought refuge in the shades of faith. And the light of faith has illuminated her soul and penetrated her heart and enlightened her inside. After being told by a fortune teller, as we know, that he would be overtaken by a man from the children of Israel, Pharaoh ordered all male babies to be executed. And in the Quran, this is described, this horrific life of the children of Israel is described as follows. "And remember, we delivered you from the people of Pharaoh. They set you hard tasks and punishments, slaughtered your sons and let your women live. Therein was a tremendous trial from your Lord." And in the meantime, the mother of Moses became pregnant, but she concealed her pregnancy so that she was able to deliver her baby. And when the baby was born, it was more difficult to hide the fact. So God told the mother of Moses in the verses from Quran, "And we inspired the mother of Moses, saying, suckle him, breastfeed him, but when you fear for him, then cast him in the river and fear not nor grieve. Verily, we shall bring him back to you and shall make him one of our messengers." And at this moment, we may like to remember Aaron, the brother of Moses. Aaron was born during a year in which children were not killed. and therefore the mother of Moses delivered him in safety. She gave birth to Moses in the following year. And if we continue, just as God had promised, Prophet Moses came safely to shore, and he was found by Asiya there, and she convinced her husband to adopt the child. And here in this following verses, Asiya is first time mentioned in the Quran, and God says what means, then the household of Pharaoh picked him up, that he might become for them an enemy and a cause of grief. Verily, Pharaoh, Haman, and their hosts were sinners. And the wife of Pharaoh said, a comfort of the eye for me and for you. Kill him not. Perhaps he may be of benefit to us, or we may adopt him as a son. And they perceive not the result of that. So this is how Asiya is first time mentioned in the Quran. She convinces her husband to adopt Moses. And the mother of Moses at that time sent his sister after him to watch what would happen. And then her name, again, is not given in the Quran, but his sister is known as Miriam in the biblical resources. So Miriam saw the baby, and she saw that he was taken by the royal family, and they were looking for wet nurses. And the baby refused to feed from other wet nurses, and then Miriam went to Asiya and suggested her mother as the wet nurse for the baby. So Moses is returned to his biological family, his birth mother, as promised. And here Asiya is the one who named the baby as Moses, because she said she drew him out of water, and it is a Hebrew name. Moses is a Hebrew name meaning pulled out of water. So Moses grew up. He grew under the protection of Asiya and the house of Pharaoh, and he grew to be a great prophet, and he called his people to the worship of the one God. But because of the oppression of Pharaoh, few people believed in him. And Pharaoh proclaimed himself as God, and many of the children of Israel were terrified to disobey him. And God says in the Quran what means, then he collected his men and made a proclamation saying, I am your Lord Most High. So for those who had dared to disobey Pharaoh and believe in Moses was a great punishment at that time. When the magicians, as we know, and his wife realized the truth of Moses' message, they immediately believed in the one true God. And to them, again in the Quran, as described, Pharaoh said, believe you in him before I give you permission. Surely this must be your leader who has taught you magic. Be sure I will cut off your hands and feet on opposite sides, and I will have you crucified on trunks of palm trees. So shall you know for certain which of us can give you the more severe and the more lasting punishment. So Pharaoh threatened here his people, the ones who dared to believe in Moses. And here we see the courage of Asiya, and yet despite the persecution, he believed in Moses and his message and held firmly to her faith. And that faith was so strong, she was willing to die for it. And when Pharaoh found out that she believed, he tortured her severely, and her belief in God was so strong that this occasion, her martyrdom made her an everlasting symbol. And Quran tells about her prayer in the following verse, which is the second time that she is mentioned in the Quran. And God has set forth an example for those who believed the wife of Pharaoh when she said, my Lord, build for me a home with you in paradise and save me from Pharaoh and his deeds and save me from the wrongdoing people. Asiya was not defined by the wickedness of the man she married. Her mind and her soul remained independent from her husband. And her heart was not a slave of his beliefs. She refused to submit to the tyranny of her husband, but chose instead to dedicate her soul, herself, to God. She was kind-hearted, And she was the reason that Prophet Moses was not killed by Pharaoh like the other newborn babies of that time. And what made her exceptional can be explained under three important characteristics of her. And first of all, she stood against a tyrant. And second is she refused all the wealth, status, possibility as the wife of a king. She was rich, she was a queen, but she didn't she disregard all of these. She didn't pay attention to all of these, and she did what she believed without thinking twice and faced the consequences, which is the third important characteristics of her. So here I'm going to leave you thinking how she endured by standing against an oppressor and chose to become a real believer. What would we do if we were her? And would it be easy to choose what she chose? Would we be able to stand against an oppressor? So you can share your thoughts if you would like in the comments, and we will be glad to hear your opinions. Now I'm going to give it over Mualla to tell us about Mary.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Betül. Today I'll be talking about Mary. Mary was one of the greatest women in history. So she's the only woman mentioned by name in the Holy Quran, which refers to 70 times and explicitly identifies her as the greatest woman. And furthermore, in the Quran, there is another chapter named after the family of Virgin Mary, and it's the second longest chapter in the Quran. It's quite challenging for me to talk about Mary in a short time. There are also so many other verses about Mary that and her family that I will not be able to dive into detail today, but I'll briefly talk about Mary and how she is mentioned in the Holy Book Quran. Again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate. Type in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer them. First of all, Mary comes from a pure lineage, which is the line of the prophets, David, Solomon, and Aaron. Over the years, Amram, Mary's father, and Hannah, her mother, had no children. On one particular day, the sight of a bird feeding her young reunited Hannah's desire for a child. She prayed to God to fulfill her wish, so Amram's wife became pregnant and made the following prayer. Remember, when the wife of Amram said, "My Lord, I have dedicated that which is in my womb to your exclusive service. Accept it then from me. Surely you are the all-hearing, the all-knowing." Hannah's prayer was accepted, and she became pregnant. Before the birth of Mary, her father Amram passed away, and Hannah thought she was having a boy. However, she gave birth to a girl, and Quran chapter 3 verses 36 describes as follows. But when she delivered her, she said, "My Lord, I have given birth to a female." And God knew best of what she was delivered. And the male could not be the same as the female child, she said. "I have named her Mary, and I seek refuge in you, and for her descendants from Satan, the eternally rejected from God's mercy." I wanted to mention something quick here, that remember Hannah's prayer that she promised to devote the children to the service of God. So women were not allowed to stay at the place of worship and to be raised there. And traditionally, male children were dedicated to the temple. That's why she was expecting a boy and surprised when she had a girl. So it has nothing to do with one superior than the other. So Hannah takes Mary to the temple as promised, and an exception is given to Mary to stay close to the temple. Then an argument started between Zechariah and the clergyman to be in the charge of Mary. Then they decided to throw their pens to the Jordan River, and those hands dancing in the water would be chosen to raise Mary. And it was Zechariah's pen that stood on the water, and he raised Mary. And here's another Quranic verse tells about this story. That is from the news of the unseen, which they revealed to you, O Muhammad. And you were not with them when they cast their pens as to which of them would be responsible for Mary, nor were you with them when they disputed. When Zechariah visited her in her sanctuary, he saw summer fruits and vegetables in the winter, and winter fruits and vegetables during summer in her room. So if you don't know what summer fruits or winter fruits are, that's okay, because we can find any fruits and vegetables of any kind at the markets now. Let's take a look at the verse describes this story. Her Lord accepted her with gracious favor and enabled her a good growth and entrusted her to the care of Zechariah. When Zechariah went into her in the sanctuary, he found her provided with food. Mary, he asked, how does this come to you? From God, she answered. Truly, God provides to whomever he wills without account. Mary means pious one, and who was the mistress of all women in paradise. The following verses describes this in the chapter 3, verse 42. By the way, chapter 3 is the name I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that it's named under Mary's family. It's the second longest chapter in the Quran. Let's take a look at verse 42. Then I'll read verse 43. Then the angel said, Mary, God has chosen you and purified you, and exalted you above all the women in the world. O Mary, be devoutly obedient to your Lord, and to prostrate and bow with those who bow in prayer. I want to explain something quickly here. That let's remember the story, how women were restricted to stay at the place of worship. And now let's take a look at this verse, that Mary was praying with the ones who were praying at the temple. So Mary is a great example, not only for women, but for men to understand the real aspects of prayer, that the place of worship does not belong to one gender only. In this perspective, I want to share another verse from the Quran. O humankind, surely we have created you from a single male and female, and made you into tribes and families so that you may know one another. Surely the most honorable of you in God's sight is the one best in piety, righteousness, and reverence for God. Surely God is all-knowing, all-aware. So as we can understand from these verses, the only thing matters in the sight of God is the piety, righteousness, and the reverence. I'll continue from the following verse. O Mary, be devoutly obedient to your Lord, and to prostrate and bow with those who bow in prayer. And remember when the angel said, Mary, God gives you the glad tidings of a word from him, to be called the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, highly honored in the world and the hereafter, and one of those near station to God. He will speak to people in the cradle and in the manhood, and he is one of the righteous. Lord, said Mary, how shall I have a son, seeing no mortal has ever touched me? That is how it is, he said. God creates whatever he wills when he decrees a thing, and he does but say it to be, and it is. And he will teach him the book and the wisdom and the Torah and the gospel. So Mary grew up in a temple. By the way, again, I want to go back to the topic of how women were not allowed to stay at the place of worship. It sounds horrible. Mary was an exception. That why she was an exception? Because she was unique and she was a real worshiper, and people realized of her uniqueness. Now I'll start reading the verses from chapter 19. It's the chapter that from it's the chapter that named under Mary. So that chapter 19 in the verses 16 and 17. And make mention in the book of Mary. She withdrew from her family to a chamber in the temple facing east. Thus she kept herself in seclusion from people. Then we sent to her our spirit, and it disappeared before her in the form of a perfect man. Here, the spirit who appeared before Mary in the form of a perfect man was the angel of revelation, Archangel Gabriel, be peace upon him. We are still in the same chapter, chapter Mary, 18 and 19, 18, 19, and 20. She said, I seek refuge in the all-merciful from you if you're a pious, God-conscious one. He replied, I'm only a messenger of your Lord, to be a means for God's gift to you of a pure son. She said, how shall I have a son, seeing no mortal has ever touched me, and I have never been unchaste? Now I'll talk about verse 20, 22. He said, just so. Your Lord says it's easy for me, and so that we make him for humankind a sign and a mercy from us. It's a matter already decreed. So she conceived him, and then she withdrew with him to a distant place. And the pain of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a date palm. She said, would that I had died before this and had become a thing forgotten, completely forgotten. It's heartbreaking that she was going through all this difficulty by herself. And now we're gonna see the other verses from chapter Mary. A voice called out to her from beneath her, do not grieve, your Lord has set a stream at your feet, and shake the trunk of the date palm towards you. It will drop fresh, ripe dates upon you. So eat and drink and be comforted. If you should see some person say, I have vowed a fast of silence to the all-merciful, so I cannot speak to any human being today. She came to her people carrying him. They exclaimed, O Mary, you have come for sure with an unheard of thing, mighty thing. O sister of Aaron, your father was never an evil man, nor was your mother unchaste. Mary pointed to him, the infant, signifying that he could answer. They cried, how can we talk to one in the cradle, an infant boy? The infant said, Jesus said, surely I am a servant of God. He will give me the book and make me a prophet. So I want to stop here to give a quick explanation. They called her the sister of Aaron just because it was a custom to link people with their ancestors. So Mary was a descendant of Prophet Aaron, so people called her the sister of Aaron. He has made me blessed wherever I may be, and he has enjoined upon me the prayer and the prescribed purifying alms for as long as I live. And he has made me dutiful toward my mother, and he has not made me unruly. So peace be upon me on the day I was born, and the day of my death, and the day when I will be raised to life. Mary was a perfectly chaste, devout, and righteous. Her mother dedicated her to the service of temple. She spent all her time in that service and the worship of God. She used to pray, prostrate, give thanks, and feel the inspiration of angels in her heart. God chose her as the Virgin Mary of Prophet Jesus, who was distinguished among the prophets with his superior spirituality. If you have any question about Mary, please type in the chat box. Now I'm gonna leave it a bit to, she's gonna talk about Khadija.
All right, Khadija is the wife of Prophet. So if we begin with the question, who was Khadija? Yeah, we're going to just say that she was the wife of Prophet, but let's go into details and know more about her and her personality to understand her wisdom and greatness. She was born in 555 after death in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, to Huwaylid and Fatima. They belonged to the noble family of Quraysh, and her father was a well-known chief of Mecca, and he was a successful merchant who traded rare merchandise. Khadija and Prophet are distant cousins. So if we trace back the family tree of Khadija and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we will find that they have a common ancestor, and they are distant cousins and the grandchildren of Qusay, who lived a century and a half before the birth of Prophet. And Qusay, their great-great-grandfather, was a man of remarkable character and intelligence, and he is actually regarded as the founder of the city of Mecca. And so after this brief introduction about Khadija and her background, let's talk about her noble qualities, even when she was a child. So from her childhood, she possessed noble qualities, and she grew up into a pious, quiet, and intelligent young woman. Due to her moral virtues, the people of Mecca called her in Arabic the Tahira, and which means the pure and the virtuous. She had a real tender heart and a tender and compassionate heart, and she was generous. She was generous in all aspects and with her money, and used to help the poor, the needy, the orphans, and the widows. And we can see numerous examples of her generosity from her life. I would also like to give some background information on the business expeditions of Khadija's family to understand her later life. In the 6th century, the Quraysh tribe, as we have just mentioned, that Khadija belonged to, began to play a leading role in trade with the neighboring countries. Their trade caravans traveled as far as Syria, Egypt, Persia, Iraq, and Palestine, as well as Abyssinia and the north and in the south, and different countries. And the Arab traders used to supply luxury items. And sometimes the caravan consisted of 1,000 camels, which made long journeys. And Mecca was prosperous at that time, not only because of the profits they derived from the trade, but also because of Kaaba, the house of God, being there and being a center of attention for pilgrimage for ages. Let's also talk about her early marriages. When Khadija grew up, her father gave her hand in marriage with a merchant, and they lived happily but her husband got sick and passed away early. And she got married a second time with a rich trader, yet she again lost her second husband too on the way back from his business expedition. And she became a widow for the second time. And after that, she decided not to marry again and live an independent life. However, shortly after the death of her second husband, her father passed away too. And now it was a time for her to look after the business herself. And so she inherited her father's skills in a time in history where society is male dominated and somehow dangerous. And she worked hard, and soon she was regarded as an intelligent merchant woman of great dignity and wealth. And so in the meantime, she employed trade agents, and the agents used to carry the merchandise to other countries. And if we would like to mention what was happening to Muhammad at that time, he was a young boy at the age of 12, and he joined his first journey with his uncle in one of the caravans that Khadija sent to other countries. However, years passed, and Muhammad became a young man with good manners and extraordinary qualities, and people called him in Arabic Al-Amin, which means the trustworthy. Khadija had heard of the honesty, piety, and trustworthiness and high moral character of him, and she therefore approached Muhammad's uncle and suggested him that he should let his nephew lead a trading caravan of hers to Syria, because she was looking for trusted people. And Muhammad and his uncle agreed on that. And after the journey, her servant reported how he was impressed by his management and honesty. So the servant was full of praise for him, and everything Khadija heard good about him created a deep impression in her mind, and she decided to make him a marriage proposal after taking the opinions of her relatives, her friend, and the uncle of Prophet. Both parts agreed on that, and the marriage was settled for these two great souls. At that time, Khadija was 40 and Muhammad was 25 years old. They had 3 sons and 4 daughters together. All passed away at very young ages, except their daughter Fatima, who lived a little longer after Prophet passed away. And Muhammad was a very loving and affectionate husband who showed great regard and consideration to his wife. And Khadija, on her part, proved to be a constant source of support and comfort to her husband as well. And soon after their marriage, Khadija proposed to hand over all her wealth as well as her slaves to her husband, which shows her great generosity. And after Muhammad making sure that Khadija was sincere in doing so, of such a wealthy woman handing over all her wealth, he declared that he would distribute all of it among the poor and the needy people and would set free all the slaves. And the first revelation and the prophethood. When Muhammad was 40 years old, he encountered the Archangel Gabriel. It was on a Monday in the last 10 days of Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, and he was praying in a cave alone. The angel came and revealed the first verses of the Holy Quran. Then Gabriel disappeared and Muhammad was full of anxiety. He was anxious because of the responsibility that Allah was about to place on him. He went home immediately and said to Khadija to wrap him up. He repeated that a couple of times. So he said, wrap me up with something because of his anxiety. Khadija tried to comfort her husband, but later on she suggested that they can go consult to her cousin, Baraka, who was a Christian hermit. When they went to Baraka, to her cousin, they explained what happened, And after her cousin heard the details of the incident, he said, "I'm sure the angel who used to come to Moses had come to you, and I wish I would be alive long enough to give you my support." And at that moment, Khadija declared her faith in God and in his prophet, and she became the first Muslim in the world and the first person to believe in Islam. She had witnessed Prophet's purity and greatness in his youth and spent 15 years in his company. So it wasn't very difficult for her to accept what revealed to him without any hesitation. She stood next to him and supported him during all those difficult times, during the persecution, and never left. And then there was the boycott years, the last 3 years of her life. She couldn't stay in Mecca, but because of the boycott that the Meccans held against Muslims, they had to spend those 3 years out of the town at another town. And it was a time of poverty and hunger, and the health of Khadija deteriorated. And shortly after the boycott was over, they turned back to Mecca, but Khadija passed away. And she was 65 when she died, and it was a 10-year of prophethood. And that year is known as the year of grief. Khadija was the solace and comfort to the Prophet for 25 years. They had a happy, good 25 years together. She was praised. She was praised in Hadith and greeted by God. She was there with him during the most difficult times as his only wife. And after her death, throughout the rest of his life, Prophet also cherished her memory and often recalled her loyalty and kindness and devotion to him. And he used to say she was the best woman of her time. And in that meaning, he is reported to say the best woman of her time was Mary, daughter of Imran, and the best woman of her time is Khadija, the daughter of Huwaylid. So this saying of Prophet is another saying of him praising Mary and Khadija, two of them in one of his hadiths. So God is pleased with her and sent her glad tidings with Archangel Gabriel as well. The angel came to the Prophet and said, "Messenger of God, here comes Khadija, who is bringing some food for you. When she sees you, give her the salutation of peace from your Lord and salutation of peace from me, and give her good news that she will have a house in paradise." And after receiving that message of salutations of peace from God, the Almighty, and the Archangel Gabriel through the Prophet, she said, "God is the source of peace himself. May peace be upon Gabriel, and may peace be upon you." She expressed her humble greetings in return. All in all, Khadija was an outstanding woman. The strength of her character and noble qualities earned her the honor of being greeted by God and his angel through Prophet. And her faithfulness, her integrity, her truth, her modesty and nobility was incomparable. And she was generous and wise and understanding. She was the first wife of Prophet, and they lived in peace together and in harmony for almost 25 years. And she was the first person to accept Islam as a religion and as her way of life. Let's remember her with her beautiful personality, and I'm going to give it over to Mualla to tell us about Fatima.
Fatima was the youngest daughter of Prophet Muhammad and Khadija, be peace upon them. She was the child closest to her father and supported him in his difficulties. Prophet Muhammad's descendants through his grandsons, the son of Fatima and Ali. Fatima was one of the first person who accepted Islam, and the Prophet was teaching that there is only one God in a polytheist society. Polytheists didn't accept the message and started persecuting Muslims. She witnessed her father and mother being surrounded and isolated in where Meccans placed all the Muslims in an area of desert for 3 years. And it was the time where all Muslims faced poverty and hunger. The Prophet Muhammad, be peace upon him, and early Muslims responded to the tyranny of the pagans with the utmost resolve and patience. They continued to practice their faith, and the Prophet continued his mission of prophethood. Yet their ultimate reliance was on God, and they hold on to the power of faith. Fatima faced all these hardships along with all Muslims. During the time of hate towards Muslims, once Fatima saw her father while he was in prayer, and Uqba came and placed the gut of a dead animal on the Prophet's back while he was praying. The Prophet stayed in his position, and Fatima ran to her father and removed the dirt while he was crying. Prophet saw her crying and said, "Don't cry, my daughter, for indeed God will make your father victorious." God gave the order to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and to migrate from Mecca to Medina once all the persecution of the Muslims by the Quraysh became unbearable. Gradually, Fatima and all Muslims migrate to Medina. Shortly after the journey to Medina, Fatima got married to Ali, and um, her husband Ali. There is a story that I wanted to talk about. The first part, Ali narrates the story. The second part, we're gonna listen from Fatima. So her husband Ali narrates the following: We lived in a house with just a small room. There, Fatima would light a fire and try to cook. She also baked bread and carried water. Her hands became covered with calluses from turning the milestones, as did her back from carrying water. I suggested Fatima that she ask for a servant from her father, and she tells the story from here. Now we are going to listen the story from Fatima, from the Fatima's words. I went to my father. He was not at home, so I returned home. Later on, messenger came in and sat between us. He asked what we wanted, and I explained the situation. The messenger, in an awesome manner, replied, "When you go to bed, say, 'All be glory to God' 33 times, 'All praise to God' 33 times, and 'God is the greatest' 34 times. This is better for you than having a mate." The story, actually, it's intense, but we need to look at the eyes of what messenger was actually saying through this conversation. So fulfill your duties in perfect to your Lord. Also, let's take a look at from another perspective that Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, was the leader during that time. So it was easy for him to provide a servant to Fatima, but he chose a humble life and showed a humble life to his descendants. And he also asked his descendants, his family, to do the same. Prophet Muhammad loved Fatima like his own self. As soon as Fatima entered the room, he would stand and take her hands and make her sit where he had been sitting. There was a great love in between them. That's why once the messenger of God got sick, Fatima went to see him, and he was unable to get up and kiss her, as was his usual. So she sat right next to the Prophet, and the Prophet said, "Bring your ear close to me, Fatima." So he whispered something in her ear, so she started crying. Then Prophet again said, "Bring your ear closer to me, Fatima." And he whispered something else in her ear. And so she started laughing. Aisha asked later about what he whispered, and she said, "Oh, Fatima, I'm going to die tonight." So I started crying. When he saw me crying, he said, "You will be the first family member to follow me." Then I started laughing. Fatima passed away 6 months after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and she requested to be buried at night. Tonight we talked about 4 women had solid spiritual personalities. We can look at the example they set for us. So Maryam's wife was characterized by piety, chastity, and faith. And Khadija was virtuous, intelligent, and didn't fall into wealth, power, or fame. Fatima practiced patience in the face of unending hardships. Asiya chose faith over royalty. All 4 women shared the common personalities, such as they had first is the exceptional faith and dedication to God, and then their righteousness, which is a moral beauty. They showed patience and endurance in most cases, which also made them strong in their character. They displayed fortune, which is courage and steadiness, and their highest degree of virtue provided us their greatness and how honorable they are. Maryam and Asiya both raised 2 great prophets, Prophet Jesus and Moses, peace be upon them. Fatima and Khadija stood next to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Difficulties are undeniable while playing our roles in life, and we should remember that God always has a way out for every challenge. And those 4 women we talked about tonight, those are the great examples of this. We talked about these great women who inspired us, and I hope you will inspire your lives with their stories as well. Now we can look at the chat box and answer the questions, if is there any.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both so much for everything. And yeah, we do have 2 questions. One says, what makes 4 women holy?
What makes woman holy?
What makes these 4 important women important? What makes them holy?
Number one, I can say is they faced great difficulties their time, and they were righteous and patient, and they were strong. That's all I can say. At the same time, they were also they had courage to stay strong and be in the face of difficulties. But at the end, what we see from all these wonderful women is they overcome these obstacles by themselves, and of course with the help of God. Richard, would you like to add something to this question?
Yes, thank you. Yes, what makes them holy is, as Mualla explained, yeah, their characters, their personalities. But first of all, I think it's their faith, it's their belief in God that made them stand out and be patient, be endured, or be virtuous, having all these characters and personalities. So these women, when we talk about the term holy, we need to think about the holy things which comes from God, and they received all these qualities from Him, and they never left these personalities once at a time in their life. So in all their actions, in all cases, in all things that they faced, they continued having their exceptional faith and I think I can say that it's their faith, first of all, what makes them holy. Thank you.
All right. I think we're like almost out of time too, so we won't be able to answer any other questions, unfortunately. But thank you so much to everyone, not just our speakers, but all the participants as well. Thank you so much for listening and from your homes and engaging with us. And please do not forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, because the next talk is going to be about practicing our religious duties during a pandemic. And it is going to include three distinguished speakers, who are Father Thomas Mitchell, Rabbi Stephen Folberg, and Dr. Bilal Saad. And it is going to be on May 11th at 6 p.m. again. And thank you, everyone, once again.
Thank you.
And have a good night.